The Montana sky that September morning was the color of a bruise healing, pale purple fading into gold at the edges, the kind of sky that made a person feel both small and grateful at once. Clara Walsh was already up before it. She moved through the yard in the half-dark, scattering feed for the hens, her breath a small cloud in the cold air. The rooster hadn't even found his voice yet. She liked this hour. Nobody needed anything from her. The land was just land, not her father's debt, not her brother's inheritance, not the subject of every whispered conversation in Harlow Creek about what a shame it was, a woman running a homestead alone at 24. She picked up the brown hen that always wandered too close to the fence post and tucked it under her arm without thinking. 3 years she'd worked this place. 3 years since her father passed and left her 40 acres, a leaking roof, and a mule named Gospel. She hadn't asked for help from anyone. Except, if she was honest with herself, she had always been glad when Thomas Hale rode over from the next property. He came that morning the way he usually did, unannounced, easy in the saddle, like he had nowhere more important to be. His horse, a dark bay called Remnant, knew the path to her fence line without being steered. "Morning, Clara." He swung down and looped the reins over the post. "Your north fence is down again. 3 posts, near the creek bend." "I know," she said. "I was going to fix it this afternoon." "I'll do it." "I didn't ask you to." He smiled at that. He always smiled at that. Thomas Hale was 30 years old and had the unhurried manner of a man who had made peace with hard work a long time ago. He wasn't loud. He didn't fill a room the way some men tried to. He just showed up and did things, quietly, and somehow that had always been worse for Clara than if he'd been easier to dismiss. They stood by the fence while the morning warmed around them. He drank the coffee she brought out without making a fuss about it. They talked about the early frost, about whether the Calloway brothers would sell their eastern pasture, about the price of hay going into winter. Then he said it. He was watching her hens scratch at the dirt, and he said it the way a man says something he thinks is harmless, offhand, almost fond. "You know, Clara, at this rate you'll never get married." He was smiling when he said it. She didn't say anything right away. That was the thing about Clara Walsh. She didn't react the way other women might, no sharp word, no flush of embarrassment. She just went still, the way the land went still before weather came in. Thomas felt it a half-second too late. The truth was he had never let himself think clearly about Clara. It was easier not to. She was his neighbor. She was capable and proud and had made it plain for 3 years that she didn't need anybody. And he had told himself, in the quiet of his own house at night, that a woman like that wouldn't want a man who had nothing much to offer beyond a modest ranch, some cattle, and a willingness to fix fence posts. So he had kept it friendly. He had kept it easy. He had made jokes. And Clara had let him, because she was tired of hoping out loud and being disappointed. She had watched him ride over week after week, had saved the best of whatever she baked and told herself it was just neighborly, had listened for remnants of on the path and told herself it meant nothing. 3 years of telling herself it meant nothing. She set the brown hen down carefully in the yard. It had started the winter her father died. Thomas had shown up 2 days after the burial with a load of splitwood stacked in his wagon bed and had unloaded it without being asked, without saying much beyond, "Ground's going to freeze hard this week." She had stood on the porch and watched him work and had not cried, because she had already used up her tears and what was left was just the cold fact of everything she now had to carry. He had come back the following week to check on the mule's leg, which had been favoring since November. He'd shown her how to wrap it, talking low and steady the way men talk to animals, and she had watched his hands and thought, without meaning to, that they were good hands. Careful hands. By spring she had stopped pretending his visits were only about fence posts. He had never said anything that couldn't be said between neighbors. But he brought her extra seed when the supply wagon was late and charged her nothing. He sat at her kitchen table on cold evenings and drank coffee until the lamp burned low. Once, during a thunderstorm that came in fast and mean off the mountains, he had stayed the night in her barn without being asked because Gospel was spooked and she couldn't manage him alone, and in the morning he had eaten breakfast at her table and looked out her window at her land the way a man looks at something he is considering. She had thought, she had let herself think, that maybe he was working up to something. He never did. And so she had kept feeding him coffee and mending what broke and telling herself she was content with what this was. Until this morning. She turned and walked back toward the house. Not fast. Not angry, the way a girl might storm off. Just steady, the way Clara Walsh did everything, like she had made a decision and intended to honor it. Clara. She didn't stop. Clara, I didn't mean. I know what you meant, Thomas. She said it without turning around. Her voice was level. That was the worst part for him, that she wasn't even angry. You meant it friendly. You always mean everything friendly. He was off the fence post and across the yard in a few strides. He stopped a few feet behind her, hat in his hands, because he was a man who had spent 3 years being careful and was only now understanding what that carefulness had cost. I don't know how to say this right, he said. She turned then. Her eyes were dry and clear, and that was somehow harder to look at than tears would have been. Then don't say it unless you mean it, she said quietly. I'm tired, Thomas. I'm tired of friendly. The morning was fully bright now. Somewhere behind her the brown hen clucked at nothing. Gospel shifted in the small barn and the wood creaked. Thomas Hale looked at the woman standing in front of him, the one who had been feeding him coffee and quietly keeping her feelings to herself for 3 years while he told himself he wasn't good enough, and understood, finally, that the only thing he wasn't good enough to do was keep wasting her time. I don't want to be friendly, he said. I haven't wanted that in a long time. I just didn't know how to tell you without ruining what we had. She looked at him for a long moment. You almost ruined it anyway, she said. I know. He fixed the north fence that afternoon. She brought him lunch, cold biscuits, dried beef, 2 apples from the tree by the well, and set it on the flat rock near the creek bend without ceremony. He ate without stopping work. She sat nearby and watched the water move and didn't say much. But when he was done and washing his hands in the creek, she said, You could stay for supper. He looked up at her. If you want, she added, in the careful way of a woman who had learned not to want things too openly. I want, he said. It wasn't a declaration. There were no grand words spoken over the Montana hills that evening, no promises made while the sunset burned red above the Rockies. There was just supper at her kitchen table, and the lamp burning between them, and a conversation that went longer than it needed to because neither of them was in a hurry to end it. Outside, the first real cold of autumn settled over the 40 acres. Inside, for the first time in 3 years, Clara Walsh did not feel like she was carrying it alone. Heroic deeds, where the Wild West meets true love. Face with cowboy hat, cactus red heart.